My name is Jacob Harrow, but everyone here just calls me Jake. I'm 30 years old, 5 years deep into a job that's carved lines into my face no man my age should have. I've got short brown hair, a scruffy beard I barely bother to trim, and eyes that don't sleep much anymore. I'm not a big guy, lean, wiry, built from years of tension rather than muscle, but I've learned to move fast and think faster. I work as a guard in a prison that doesn't exist on any map, a place buried so deep under layers of secrecy and concrete that even the air feels like it's lying to you. It's not a prison for murderers or thieves, it's a vault for things that shouldn't be, people, creatures, anomalies that defy every law of nature I ever learned. I keep the door shut. That's my job. I follow the rules, stick to the routine, and pray it's enough. Most days it is, but not today. It started with a scream, a sound so raw it tore through the flickering hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I was halfway down Corridor 7, clipboard in hand, when it hit me. My boots skidded on the damp floor as I spun toward the sound, my heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. I knew that scream. It was rookie Marcus Delaney, the new kid, 25 and cocky, all sharp edges and big talk. I'd warned him about the phaser not 10 minutes ago. Told him to stay back when the guy started blinking, but Marcus had that gleam in his eye. The kind newbies get when they think they can prove something. I should have dragged him out of there myself. I sprinted towards cell 13, the phaser's cage, my breath ragged in my throat. The hallway smelled like rust and wet stone, the walls slick with condensation that never dried. When I got there, the steel door was still locked, but the observation window was smeared with red. Thick, wet streaks that dripped down the glass like paint. Marcus was gone. No body, no gear, just a puddle of blood and bits of bone scattered across the floor inside. The phaser was back, hunched in the corner, his ordinary face lit by a faint glow. He flickered again, a flash of blinding light, and reappeared on the opposite side of the cell, sobbing into his hands. I stood there, frozen, my stomach twisting into knots. I'd seen this before. Guards caught in the blink, turned to mist in an instant, but it never got easier. My hands shook as I scribbled a note on my clipboard. Delaney, Marcus, terminated, phaser incident. I didn't look up again. I couldn't. That was just the beginning. This place, this vault beneath the world, doesn't give you time to breathe. I've been here long enough to know it's not just the prisoners testing us, it's the whole damn building. It's alive in a way I can't explain, a sprawling, sentient thing that grows and shifts to hold whatever we throw at it. But lately, it's been groaning, cracking at the edges like it's tired of carrying the weight. And the prisoners? They're getting restless. I can feel it in the air, a buzzing tension that prickles my skin every time I clock in. After Marcus, I was sent to deal with Prisoner X. He's one of the worst, dangerous by choice, not circumstance. Picture a man over 6 feet tall, built like a tank with skin that gleams like polished steel. He turned himself into a living weapon, chemicals, tech, surgeries no sane person would survive. The scientist here stripped out most of his internal mods, but what's left is still lethal. Tasers don't touch him, fire just makes him laugh. We've got one trick, a drill to his neck, a reinforced syringe loaded with enough sedative to drop an elephant. Even then, it's a gamble. I led a team of 4 that day. Me, 2 vets named Harris and Lopez, and a jittery replacement for Marcus named Tyler. We moved slow, gear clanking, the drill humming in my hands. Prisoner X stood in the center of his cell, arms bound in titanium cuffs, staring at us with eyes that burned red in the dim light. I could feel the heat of him, like standing too close to a furnace. My mouth went dry as I nodded to Harris. "Keep the restraints tight," I said, voice steady despite the sweat beading on my forehead. "Tyler, you're on the syringe." We got the drill in place, the bit grinding against his neck. It screeched, metal on metal, and I felt the vibration up my arms. He didn't flinch, just grinned, teeth sharp and uneven. "You think that's enough?" he rasped, voice like gravel scraping over steel. Then he moved, fast, too fast for something that size. His shoulder slammed into the wall, a deafening crack splitting the air. The drill flew from my grip, spinning across the floor. Tyler lunged for the syringe, but Prisoner X twisted and the needle snapped clean in half. I yelled for Harris to fall back, but it was too late. X drove his elbow into Harris's chest, caving it in with a wet crunch. Blood sprayed across my face, hot and sticky, and I stumbled back, gagging. Lopez grabbed my arm, dragging me toward the door as Tyler screamed behind us. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The last thing I heard was X laughing, a low guttural sound that echoed down the hall as the cell door buckled under his weight. We sealed the block, but I knew it wouldn't hold him long. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I radioed it in. "Prisoner X loose, casualties confirmed." My voice cracked and I hated myself for it. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. I sat in the break room, a flickering bulb overhead, casting shadows on the cracked concrete walls. My coffee was cold, untouched, my fingers tapping the table in a rhythm I couldn't control. Lopez slumped across from me, staring at nothing, his face pale. "We're losing it, Jake," he muttered. "This place, it's falling apart." I didn't answer. He was right, but saying it out loud felt like tempting fate. The next assignment was Small Haven, the fake town buried in the facility's lower levels. It's where we keep Emily Carter, a 15-year-old girl who could level continents if she ever lost her temper. She's got dark hair, pale skin, and eyes that see right through you. Literally. She can hear your thoughts, every damn one, and there's no hiding from it. Small Haven is her cage, a perfect little lie with actors playing her family, her friends, her whole world. My job was to check on her, blend in as a high school kid. I've got a baby face, smooth skin, no scars, so it works. I shaved that morning, pulled on a hoodie, and drove a beat-up sedan into town, the skybox overhead glowing a fake blue. The dinner at Emily's house started normal enough. Her parents smiled too wide, their voices too chipper, like dolls wound up to play their parts. I sat across from her, picking at a plate of roast chicken. My mom, an actress named Sarah, chatting about our made-up life. I kept my thoughts blank, focusing on the food, the clink of forks. But Emily watched me, her fork hovering over her plate, her lips twitching like she was holding back a secret. Then Sarah pulled the parents aside for wine, leaving us alone. My pulse spiked, but I kept my face neutral. "So how's school?" I asked, casual, like I wasn't sweating under my collar. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "You don't need to pretend, Jake," she said, soft but firm. My stomach dropped. "I hear you, all of it. This town, it's not real." I froze, my fork clattering against the plate. "What do you mean?" I stammered, my voice higher than I wanted. She smiled, small and sad. "It's a simulation, right? All of this. I know what's inside me. Something big. Something they're scared of." My mind raced, panic clawing at my chest. She wasn't supposed to know. I'd been drilled on this. Keep her calm, keep her clueless. But she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I could make it all go away if I wanted. Just boom. Before I could respond, a pulse of energy rippled from her, sharp and hot. The glass table between us shattered, shards flying like shrapnel. I ducked, my arms shielding my face, glass slicing into my sleeve. Her parents rushed in, their faces white, but Emily just stared at me, unblinking. "Don't worry," she said. "I won't, not yet." My heart hammered so hard I thought it'd burst. I nodded mute, my throat too tight to speak. Back at base, I reported it, off the books, like she asked. I couldn't shake her words, the way they sank into me like hooks. She knew too much, felt too much, and I was terrified of what "not yet" meant. I barely slept that night, the memory of that shattered table replaying behind my eyes, the sound of her voice looping in my head. Then came Frank. We call him the Jester, a wiry guy with a grin that stretches too wide, eyes that glint like he's always in on a joke you don't get. He's not human, not really. He can do anything, teleport, set things on fire, turn your head into a goddamn rose if he feels like it. He turned himself in years ago, strolled up to the front door of a place no one's supposed to find, said he was bored. Now he's our problem, a walking disaster we keep in line with fake jobs and praise. I was on hall duty when he appeared, popping out of thin air with a rose in his hand, petals dripping blood. "Hey Jake," he said, twirling it between his fingers. "Guess who got a new haircut?" My gut twisted. What'd you do, Frank?" I asked, my voice low, dread pooling in my chest. He laughed, high and sharp. "That donor guy, Lopez, right? He's prettier now." I bolted down the hall, my boots pounding the floor, and found Lopez, or what was left of him. His body slumped against the wall, a rose sprouting from his neck, roots curling into his skin like veins. I gagged, bile burning my throat, and Frank's laughter chased me as I ran. He wasn't done. "Let's play," he called, and before I could blink, Prisoner X was there, unchained, roaring, his steel skin gleaming under the lights. Frank had teleported him right into the open. I turned and sprinted, my lungs burning, X's footsteps shaking the ground behind me. I dove into a side corridor, slamming the lockdown button, but the walls trembled, cracks spidering up the concrete. The building was screaming, a low, guttural sound that rattled my bones. That's when it hit me. The vault was breaking. I'd seen the signs for weeks. Crumbling corners, doors that wouldn't lock right. It's alive, this place, built from some anomaly we don't understand, and we've stretched it too thin. I stumbled to the control room, shoving past guards, and found Dr. Evelyn Morse barking orders. She's the scientist in charge. A cold woman with grey hair and sharper eyes, always chasing the next breakthrough no matter who dies for it. Harrow! She snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos. Get to Small Haven. Emily's destabilizing. My blood ran cold. I didn't ask questions, just ran, the building shuddering around me. When I reached the town, the fake sky flickered, glitching black. Emily stood in the square, her eyes glowing white, energy crackling around her. Jake, she said, her voice echoing in my skull. It's calling me. I stepped closer, my hands up, fear choking me. Emily, stop. You'll kill us all. She shook her head, tears streaking her face. I don't want to, but I can't hold it. The ground split beneath her, a jagged tear swallowing a bench. I lunged, grabbing her arm, but a shockwave threw me back, slamming me into a wall. My vision blurred, pain exploding in my chest. Then Prisoner X burst through, roaring, his fist smashing into a building. Dr. Morse appeared, shouting into a radio, but X charged her, pinning her to the wall with a sickening crunch. Blood pooled under her, her eyes wide and lifeless. Frank hovered above, giggling as the man in the hall's holes yawned open, black voids swallowing guards whole. Emily screamed, clutching her head, and a blinding light erupted from her. I shielded my eyes, the heat searing my skin, and then nothing. Darkness, silence. My ears rang as I groped the ground, my fingers brushing broken stone. I don't know how long we held it, I whispered, my voice hoarse, or if there's anything left to hold. The darkness pressed against me, thick and suffocating, like I'd been buried alive. My fingers clawed at the rubble, jagged edges biting into my skin, and I could taste blood in my mouth. Mine, maybe someone else's. The ringing in my ears wouldn't stop, a high-pitched whine that drilled into my skull. I couldn't see, couldn't hear anything beyond it, but I felt the ground trembling beneath me, a slow, rhythmic pulse like the building was breathing. I wasn't dead. Not yet. But I wasn't sure that was a good thing. I pushed myself up, my arms shaking, every muscle screaming in protest. My chest ached where I'd hit the wall, a dull throb that spiked with every breath. The air was heavy, clogged with dust and something metallic, like burnt copper. I fumbled for my flashlight, clipped to my belt, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the black, weak and flickering, but it was enough. I was in what was left of Small Haven Square. The fake skybox was gone, just a tangle of sparking wires dangling from a ceiling I couldn't see. The ground was split wide, a gaping crack swallowing half the street, and Emily, she was still there. She knelt in the center of it all, her small frame hunched, hands pressed to her temples. Her eyes glowed, twin points of white light in the gloom, and thin tendrils of energy snaked around her, snapping like live wires. I wanted to call out, to tell her to stop, but my throat locked up, fear rooting me in place. She looked so fragile, so lost, but I knew what she could do, what she might have already done. Emily, I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't move, didn't look at me, just stared into nothing, her lips trembling. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl rolling through the dark. My flashlight swung toward the sound, and my blood turned to ice. Prisoner X loomed at the edge of the crack, his steel skin glinting in the beam, his red eyes locked on me. Blood streaked his chest. Dr. Morse's blood, I realized, and his fists clenched, knuckles cracking like gunfire. You! He snarled, taking a step forward, the ground shuddering under his weight. You're next! I scrambled back, my boots slipping on loose gravel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it'd burst. I had no weapon, no drill, nothing but a flickering flashlight and a clipboard I'd dropped somewhere in the chaos. He lunged, faster than anything that big should move, and I dove aside, his fist smashing into the pavement where I'd been. The impact sent a shockwave through me, knocking me flat, my flashlight skittering away. I crawled, blind, my hands scraping over broken glass and twisted metal, desperation clawing at my gut. Jake! A voice cut through the noise, sharp, panicked. I twisted, squinting into the dark, and saw a figure sprinting toward me. It was Tyler, the jittery kid from X's cell, his face pale and streaked with dirt. He held a taser, useless against X, but he thrust it at me anyway. Take it, he yelled, just as X turned, his growl rising into a roar. I grabbed the taser, my fingers fumbling, and Tyler hauled me up, his grip tight on my arm. We've got to move. We ran, ducking through the wreckage of Small Haven, X's footsteps thundering behind us. My legs burned, my lungs raw, but Tyler kept pace, his breath coming in short gasps. He's loose because of Frank, he panted. That bastard's playing games again. I didn't have time to curse Frank. X was gaining, his shadow swallowing the faint light ahead. We darted into an alley, a narrow strip of fake storefronts, and I shoved Tyler behind a dumpster. my chest heaving. "Stay down," I hissed, peering out. X stopped, his head tilting like he was sniffing the air. My stomach churned as he scanned the shadows, his eyes glowing like embers. Then he laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl, and slammed his fist into a wall. The building crumpled, dust billowing around us, and I choked, my eyes stinging. "I can smell you, Harrow," he rumbled. "No walls will save you." Before I could think, a new sound sliced through the air. A piercing shriek, sharp enough to make my ears bleed. X staggered, clutching his head, and I saw her, Lila Vance, prisoner 47, standing atop a pile of rubble. She was thin, almost skeletal, with wild black hair and eyes that glinted like broken glass. Her mouth opened, and another wave of sound hit, a scream that wasn't just noise. It burrowed into your mind, twisting your thoughts into knots. I dropped to my knees, my vision blurring, Tyler groaning beside me. X roared, swinging blindly, but Leela kept it up, her voice a weapon of its own. "Who the hell?" Tyler started, but I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a shattered doorway. "New inmate," I muttered, my head pounding. "Sound manipulator. Dangerous as hell." We stumbled inside, some kind of fake shop, shelves toppled and glass crunching underfoot. I risked a glance back. Lila was still screaming, but X was fighting it, his fists smashing the ground, cracks spreading like veins. She'd bought us time, but not much. We didn't get far before the walls shook again. A deep, resonant groan that wasn't X or Lila. It was the building, the vault itself, crying out. I froze, my breath catching as the floor tilted beneath us. "It's breaking," Tyler whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, dread sinking into my bones. The vault had been straining for weeks. Too many cells, too many monsters, too much weight. And now, with Emily's power spiking, it was giving up. "We need to find her," I said, forcing my legs to move. "If she blows, none of us make it." Tyler hesitated, his eyes wide, but he followed, sticking close as we navigated the collapsing town. The air grew hotter, thicker, like something was burning deep below. We found Emily where I'd left her, still kneeling, but the energy around her was wilder now, snapping and coiling like a storm. Her face was wet with tears, her hands shaking as she pressed them to the ground. "Emily!" I shouted, my voice cracking. She looked up, her glowing eyes meeting mine, and I saw fear, real, raw fear. "Jake," she whimpered, "I can't stop it, it's too much." I knelt beside her, ignoring the heat searing my skin, and grabbed her shoulders. "You can," I said, my voice firm despite the panic clawing at me. "You're stronger than this. Focus on me." Her breath hitched, her body trembling, but the energy flickered, dimming slightly. Then Frank appeared. 1 second the space beside us was empty, the next he was there, lounging against a broken lamppost, a grin splitting his face. "Aw, Jake," he said, his tone mocking, "you're so sweet with the kid. Makes me want to cry." My stomach dropped, my grip tightening on Emily. "Frank, don't," I warned, but he just laughed, snapping his fingers. The ground erupted, a geyser of dirt and stone, and Prisoner X burst through, roaring. Emily screamed, the energy flaring again, and I was thrown back, slamming into a wall. Pain exploded down my spine, my vision swimming, but I saw X charging her, his fists raised. "No," I yelled, scrambling up, but Frank stepped in front of me, wagging a finger. "My game, my rules," he said, and flicked his wrist. X froze mid-step, his body twisting, then collapsed, a rose blooming from his chest, roots snaking through his steel skin. He hit the ground, dead, and Frank clapped like a kid at a show. "Frank, stop this!" I shouted, my voice raw. He turned, his grin fading into something colder. "Why? It's fun, but you're right, time for the big finish." He vanished, and a second later, the air rippled. I looked up. Holes, black and endless, yawned open across the square, the man in the hall's work. They pulsed, sucking in debris, guards, everything. I grabbed Emily, pulling her back, her sobs shaking her small frame. "Jake," she whispered, clinging to me. "I hear them all. They're scared." I held her tighter, my own fear choking me as the building groaned louder, walls crumbling around us. Lila's screams echoed somewhere distant, cut off abruptly, and Tyler yelled, "We're trapped!" I looked around. Rubble blocked every exit, the holes closing in. My flashlight flickered out, plunging us into dark, and Emily's glow was all we had left. "Hold on," I said, my voice breaking as the ground buckled beneath us. A deafening crack split the air, and we fell, down, down into the black, her light fading as the vault swallowed us whole. I don't know what's left up there, if anything survived. All I know is we're still falling, and the screams in the dark aren't just hers anymore. The fall seemed endless, a plunge through a void that swallowed sound and light. Emily's glow had faded to a faint shimmer, barely enough to outline her small form clinging to me. My arms ached from holding her, my fingers numb, but I wouldn't let go. The air rushed past us, cold and biting, carrying whispers, screams maybe, that weren't hers. They clawed at my mind, a chorus of terror I couldn't shut out. My stomach twisted, a sick, lurching fear that we'd never stop, that this was it, the end stretched into forever. But then the ground hit, or we hit it, hard, sudden, a jolt that snapped my teeth together and sent pain exploding up my legs. I gasped, rolling onto my side, Emily tumbling from my grip. The darkness was absolute now. Her light snuffed out, and I groped blindly, my hands brushing cold, uneven stone. "Emily!" I rasped, my voice hoarse, panic spiking as my fingers found nothing but grit. A soft whimper answered, faint but close, and I crawled toward it, my knees scraping over jagged edges. I found her, her small hand trembling as I pulled her into me. She was alive. We were alive. My chest heaved, relief flooding through me like a drug, sharp and overwhelming. I pressed my forehead to hers, her breath warm against my face, and whispered, "We made it. We're okay." But we weren't. Not really. The air shifted, a ripple I felt more than heard, and a giggle echoed through the black, high, jagged, unmistakable. Frank. My blood ran cold, every nerve screaming as I tightened my hold on Emily. "Oh, Jake," his voice sang, bouncing off unseen walls. "You didn't think I'd let you off that easy, did you?" I swung my head, searching the dark, my heart hammering. A faint red glow flickered to life, his eyes twin embers floating a few feet away. He stepped closer, his grin a slash of white in the gloom, and I saw the rose in his hand, petals dripping blood that hissed as it hit the ground. "Frank," I said, forcing my voice steady, though it shook at the edges. "This isn't fun anymore, stop." He tilted his head, like a kid sizing up a toy, and laughed again, louder, the sound drilling into my skull. "Fun's just starting," he said, and snapped his fingers. The ground lurched, a sickening tilt, and I heard it, a deep, wet crack like bone splitting. Emily gasped, her nails digging into my arm, and I smelled it before I saw it, copper, thick and fresh. My stomach churned as Frank's glow lit the scene. Prisoner X, or what was left of him, sprawled nearby. His steel skin was peeled open, roots from the rose burrowing through his chest, twisting into his flesh like worms. His red eyes stared, unblinking, frozen in a snarl of rage and pain. "Oops," Frank said, shrugging, but his grin faltered, just for a second. The ground groaned again, a shudder that knocked me off balance, and I realized it wasn't just the fall. The vault, or whatever this place had become, was still alive, still breaking, and it was angry. A crack split the air, deafening, and the stone beneath Frank buckled. He stumbled, his laugh cutting off into a yelp as tendrils of black, those damn holes from the man in the hall, erupted around him. They pulsed, hungry, and lashed onto his legs, dragging him down. "No!" he shouted, his voice cracking with something I'd never heard from him before, fear. He clawed at the ground, his nails scraping, but the holes pulled harder, swallowing his knees, his waist. "Jake, help me!" he screamed, his eyes wide, pleading, the jester mask gone. I froze, my breath caught, a twisted part of me almost wanting to reach out. But then I saw Lopez's rose head, Harris's crushed chest, X's mangled corpse, and I stayed put, my jaw tight. He'd made this hell. Let him burn in it. The holes took him, his screams echoing as he vanished. The red glow snuffed out. Silence fell, heavy and final, broken only by Emily's shallow breaths. I pulled her closer, my hands trembling, and felt the ground settle, the vault's groans fading to a low hum. It wasn't over. Not the danger, not the fear, but for now, it was still. I sat there, Emily curled against me, her warmth the only thing keeping me grounded. My chest ached, not just from the fall, but from something deeper, a weight I couldn't name. We'd survived. I'd kept her safe. That was enough. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't mean much down here. My flashlight was gone, but a faint light crept in, cold and grey, from a crack above. I squinted, my eyes burning, and saw it. A sliver of sky, real sky, not the fake blue of Small Haven. My heart leapt, a fragile hope flickering to life. "Look," I whispered, nudging Emily. She lifted her head, her eyes dull but alive, and nodded. "We could climb, maybe. We could get out." I stood, my legs wobbling, and helped her up. She leaned on me, her steps unsteady, but we moved toward that light, the promise of it pulling us forward. My mind raced, piecing together what I'd learned in this nightmare. The vault wasn't just a prison. It was a trap, a living thing we'd fed too much, pushed too far. We'd locked away power we didn't understand, played gods with things that could break us. Frank had paid for his games, X for his rage, Morse for her ambition. Me? I'd paid with every scream I couldn't unhear, every face I couldn't save. But I was still here, still breathing, and that had to mean something. As we reached the crack, I boosted Emily up, my arms straining, and she scrambled through, her small hand reaching back for mine. I pulled myself after her, rocks cutting into my palms, and collapsed onto grass. Real grass, wet with dew. The sky stretched above, grey and endless. No walls, no cells. I lay there, staring at it, my chest heaving, tears stinging my eyes. Emily sat beside me, silent, her hand in mine. We'd escaped, or at least this piece of the hell we'd known. I didn't know what waited out there, more anomalies, more monsters. But for the first time in years, I felt free. "We can't go back," Emily said, her voice small but firm. I nodded, squeezing her hand. "We won't. Whatever this world held, we'd face it together. I'd protect her, not as a guard, but as something more, something human. But here's the thing, this story is not done. The vault's still out there somewhere, broken but alive, and who knows what else crawled out when it cracked. Frank's gone, screaming into the dark, and good riddance. He got what he deserved. X2, torn apart by his own violence. They thought they could control this, bend it to their will, but power like that doesn't bow. It bites back. Me and Emily, we learned that the hard way. So now I'm asking you, what do you think's waiting for us out here? What slipped through the cracks? Drop your thoughts below, tell me your theories. Maybe you've got a piece of this puzzle I haven't seen. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that nothing stays buried forever.